I was standing in heels I couldn't afford, holding a tote that was digging into my shoulder, while everyone else leaned back like time was something they owned. I kept smiling, because that's what I do when I'm tired. I didn't sit down, even when there were empty chairs. I told myself I was fine. Someone laughed and said I was built for this. I nodded. I always nod. My phone buzzed with a balance alert I didn't open. I already knew the number. I adjusted my jacket and kept listening like I wasn't counting minutes in my head. Across the room, a woman my age talked about rest like it was normal, like it was planned. People clapped for her. I clapped too. My hands hurt more than they should have. When the organizer looked around and said, "You'll handle it, right?" Everyone turned toward me. I said yes before the word reached my brain. Then my chest tightened, and I realized I had just agreed to something I could not survive doing quietly again. Chapter 1: Pressure. I didn't always know I was doing this on purpose. I thought it was just who I was. The reliable one. The one who showed up early and stayed late. The one who didn't complain, because complaining felt like weakness, and weakness felt dangerous. I learned early that being chosen meant being useful. Not loud, not needy, useful. In college, I was the one professors trusted with extra work. They said I was mature. They said I was disciplined. They said they didn't worry about me. I wore that like armor. I didn't realize armor gets heavy when you never take it off. When I got my first job, I was grateful in a way that made me quiet. I didn't negotiate my salary. I didn't ask about vacation. I told myself I would earn comfort later. Later became a moving target. At home, sacrifice was not explained. It was expected. You didn't announce it. You just did it. You carried what needed carrying. You paid what needed paying. You didn't ask who else could help. Ease looked like irresponsibility. Rest looked like entitlement. I watched women praised for how much they could endure. I absorbed that praise even when it wasn't spoken to me directly. It felt safer to align myself with it. If I was tired, at least I was respected. I never said this out loud, but I believed being low maintenance made me lovable. I believed being easy to depend on made me worthy of staying. I believed if I could handle more than others, I would never be discarded. So I handled more. At work, people learned my rhythm. They learned I would answer emails at night. They learned I would fix things quietly. They learned I didn't push back. When something needed doing urgently, my name came up without discussion. I told myself this was leadership. I told myself this was growth. My body told a different story. It started with headaches I ignored, then jaw pain, then waking up already tired. I drank more coffee and called it discipline. Money stayed tight even when my responsibilities grew. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself my time would come. I said that for years. When people talked about soft life, I smiled politely. I made jokes about not being built for that. I said I liked being busy. I said rest made me anxious. All of that was true, but not in the way it sounded. Rest made me anxious because I didn't know who I was without pressure. I watched other women curate ease openly. They said no without apology. They left early. They spoke about boundaries like they were obvious. I told myself they were different from me. I told myself our values weren't the same. What I didn't admit was how closely I watched them. I noticed how people leaned in when they spoke, how their needs were anticipated, how their absence was felt. I noticed how no one questioned whether they were committed. I told myself sacrifice was louder than softness. I believed endurance would eventually be seen. At family gatherings, I was praised for being responsible. They asked me about work before they asked how I was. I answered with updates, not feelings. Feelings felt indulgent. I paid for things without making it a conversation. I sent money without explanation. I told myself this was love. I told myself this was duty. When people said, "She can handle it," I nodded along. I didn't correct them. I didn't say what handling it was costing me. I thought saying it would make it real. I didn't want it to be real. The day of the event, I left my apartment already tense. I checked my account balance and closed the app quickly. I told myself not to think about it. I told myself to focus. On the train, I rehearsed conversations in my head. I planned how I would sound confident but not demanding, capable but not intimidating. I adjusted my posture to look calm. Being calm took effort. When I arrived, I noticed small things first. Who had arrived early? Who looked relaxed? who was being greeted warmly. I took my place where I thought I belonged. I carried my bag like it wasn't heavy. I stood even when my feet hurt. I smiled when people spoke over me. I told myself this was professionalism. Someone asked if I could help with a last-minute change. I said yes. Someone else asked if I could cover something unexpected. I said yes again. Each yes felt automatic, like muscle memory. I noticed the woman talking about rest across the room. She spoke casually about time off, about protecting her energy. People laughed with her. They admired her confidence. I felt something tighten in my chest. I told myself it was envy and pushed it down. Envy felt small. I didn't want to be small. When the organizer called my name, it wasn't dramatic. It was assumed. You'll handle it, right? Everyone looked at me. I said yes before I checked in with myself. I always did. This time, something shifted. I felt my throat tighten. I felt heat behind my eyes. I kept my face neutral. I nodded like this was nothing new. But inside, I was calculating. Time, money, energy. What I would have to give up to make this work. What I would have to carry alone. I realized there was no room left. Not in my schedule. Not in my body. Not in my account. I stood there smiling while something in me started to panic. I had crossed another line without noticing. I had agreed to something that assumed my endurance was infinite. After the event, people thanked me. They said they didn't know what they would do without me. I accepted the praise like a debt. On the way home, my phone buzzed again. Another alert. I stopped walking. I leaned against a wall and closed my eyes. I thought about all the times I had told myself this was worth it, that sacrifice would eventually turn into security, that being chosen meant being valued. Standing there, I realized no one had actually asked what I needed. They had just counted on what I could give. I opened my eyes and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. It wasn't exhaustion. It was the fear that if I didn't stop this now, I never would. Chapter 2. I didn't tell anyone how close I was to unraveling. I went home, took off my shoes, and sat on the floor longer than I meant to. The room was quiet, too quiet. There was no one asking me for anything, and instead of relief, I felt exposed. I checked my phone again. Messages from work. A follow-up email thanking me for stepping up. Another request framed like a compliment. I didn't answer right away. That alone made my heart race. I stood up and paced. I tried to do something normal. I washed dishes that were already clean. I folded laundry I didn't need yet. I told myself movement would settle me. It didn't. What settled in instead was a question I wasn't used to hearing in my own voice. What if I don't do this anymore? The thought scared me. Not because I didn't want rest, because I didn't know what would be left if I took it. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm like always. My body didn't trust silence. I lay there staring at the ceiling, already exhausted by a day that hadn't started. At work, things moved quickly. People assumed continuity. No one asked if I was okay. They asked if I was available. I answered in fragments. Let me check. Possibly. I'll get back to you. Each delay felt like a betrayal of who I had been training myself to be. A coworker stopped by my desk and said, "You're so good under pressure." I wish I was like that. I smiled automatically. Inside, something snapped, not loudly, quietly, like a thread giving way. Later that afternoon, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Two women talking near the window. One of them was the woman from the event, the one who talked about rest like it was allowed. She said she was taking next week off. She said she needed it. The other woman nodded and said she deserved it. No qualifiers, no justification. I felt heat rise in my chest. I hated how fast resentment showed up. I hated that it was directed at her. She hadn't done anything wrong. I told myself she was lucky. I told myself she didn't have the same pressures. I told myself I was different, but the truth pressed harder. I wanted what she had chosen. I just didn't know how to choose it without losing everything else. That night, I sat with my budget open on my laptop. Numbers that never quite worked stared back at me. I had been managing the gap with optimism and overtime, with faith that something would give. Nothing had. I thought about asking for help. I thought about calling someone. I closed my laptop instead. Asking felt like failure. I had spent too long proving I didn't need it. The next day, the organizer called me. She sounded cheerful, casual. She mentioned the extra responsibility again, like it was already settled. I listened. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Then she said, I know it's a lot, but you're strong. You always come through. That word again, strong. Something in me recoiled. I felt suddenly tired of carrying a trait I never volunteered for. I opened my mouth to respond. I planned to say yes. I planned to absorb it and move on. What came out instead was silence. The pause stretched. My chest tightened. I could hear her waiting. I almost filled the space. I almost apologized. Instead, I said, I can't. The word felt foreign, heavy. It landed between us and stayed there. She laughed lightly, like she thought I was joking. Of course you can. I mean, if anyone can. I felt my pulse in my ears. I felt the room tilt slightly. I can't take that on, I said. My voice was steady. That surprised me. There was another pause, this one sharper. She asked if everything was okay. Her tone shifted, concern mixed with confusion. I said I didn't have the capacity. I didn't explain further. I didn't list reasons. I didn't soften it. The line went quiet. Then she said she would have to figure something else out. When the call ended, my hands were shaking. I sat down slowly, like my legs might give out. I waited for relief. It didn't come. What came instead was fear, immediate and overwhelming. What if this changed how they saw me? What if this was the beginning of being passed over? What if I had just erased myself? I checked my email compulsively. Nothing. I refreshed again, still nothing. By the end of the day, the silence felt louder than any confrontation. A coworker asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. The word tasted wrong. That evening, I tried to rest. I sat on my couch without my laptop. I told myself this was what I wanted. My body didn't believe me. Every few minutes, I reached for my phone. I imagined messages that weren't there. I rehearsed explanations no one had asked for. I realized how much my sense of worth depended on being needed, how discomfort rushed in the moment that need was questioned. The next morning, things felt different at work. Subtle. No one said anything directly, but I noticed fewer questions coming my way. I noticed a meeting I wasn't invited to. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself this was neutral. Still, a part of me felt exposed, like I had stepped out of a role without knowing the script for what came next. I ran into the woman who talked about rest in the hallway. She smiled and asked how I was. I said fine. She nodded and said she hoped I was taking care of myself. The words landed harder than I expected. I felt something twist in my stomach. Care felt undeserved. Care felt conditional. Later that day, I received a message from the organizer. She said they had reassigned the task. She thanked me anyway. That was it. No fallout, no confrontation, no dramatic consequence. The simplicity unsettled me. I had spent years believing my endurance was the glue holding things together. One refusal hadn't caused collapse. It had just revealed how replaceable the role was. That realization hurt more than I thought it would. I sat at my desk and stared at my screen, unable to focus. I felt untethered, like I had stepped off something solid and hadn't landed yet. I thought about how much energy I had spent proving myself, how little time I had spent asking what it was all for. When the workday ended, I didn't stay late. That alone felt like rebellion. On the walk home, I felt hollow, not free, not proud, just unsure. I realized I had crossed a line I couldn't step back over. I had shown myself that I could say no. I had also shown myself how much of my identity was built around never doing that. As I unlocked my door, the thought settled in quietly, heavier than any praise I had ever received. I didn't know who I was if I wasn't the one who handled it. And I wasn't sure anyone else did either. Chapter 3 After. The first morning after I stopped staying late, I woke up confused. My alarm hadn't gone off yet. My body felt alert in a way that didn't make sense. I lay there waiting for the familiar surge of urgency. It didn't come. I checked the time 3 times. I told myself I must have missed something. An email, a message, a problem forming somewhere without me. Nothing. I got out of bed slowly. I made coffee and drank it sitting down. That alone felt wrong, like I was breaking a rule no one had written down. On the train, I noticed how many people were relaxed. I had always assumed they were careless. Now I wondered if they were just practiced. At work, my desk felt different. Not physically, socially. Fewer people stopped by. Fewer questions floated my way. I told myself this was what I wanted. My chest stayed tight anyway. I kept waiting to be called in, to be corrected, to be told I had misstepped. Every quiet moment felt temporary, like the calm before someone noticed my absence. No one did. I finished my tasks early and sat there unsure what to do with the extra time. I scrolled through my phone and felt a familiar spike of guilt. I minimized the screen and opened a document I didn't need to work on. I pretended to be busy. At lunch, I ate alone like I always had, but this time it felt deliberate. I watched people laugh at nearby tables. I noticed how easily they occupied space. I wondered if they felt the same fear I did when things slowed down, or if slowness felt earned to them. When the day ended, I left on time again. No one stopped me, no one thanked me, no one noticed. On the walk home, the quiet followed me. I tried to tell myself this was rest. My body didn't soften, it stayed alert, like it was waiting for an emergency. At home, I sat on my couch without turning on the TV. I told myself I needed to sit with this. That's what people say when they're trying to change. Minutes passed, then more. I checked my phone again, still nothing. I realized how much of my life had been structured around reaction, responding, fixing, filling gaps. Without that, the hours felt exposed. I thought about calling someone just to talk. I didn't. Talking without a reason felt indulgent. I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling without making it sound ungrateful. The next few days followed the same pattern. I worked, I left, I rested in ways that didn't feel restful. I slept more but woke up tired. I had time but no ease. I had space but no permission to occupy it fully. At work, I overheard a conversation about a new initiative. Someone else was leading it. My name wasn't mentioned. I felt a sharp pinch of something I couldn't immediately name. Relief and rejection tangled together. I told myself this was what boundaries look like. I told myself I was learning. Still, when I checked my account balance, the numbers hadn't improved. Saying no hadn't solved anything practical yet. It had only created emotional noise. I started to question whether I could afford this version of myself. Not just financially, socially, professionally. One afternoon, a coworker stopped by my desk. She asked if everything was okay. Her voice was careful, like she didn't know which version of me she was talking to. I said yes. She nodded but didn't linger. That was when it hit me. I wasn't being punished. I was being recalibrated. People were adjusting to a version of me that didn't overextend, that didn't volunteer, that didn't signal endless capacity. I didn't know how to behave inside that adjustment. I didn't know where to stand. At home, I found myself cleaning obsessively, organizing shelves that didn't need it. I told myself I was nesting. Really, I was trying to earn the quiet. I caught myself thinking that maybe I should take on just one extra thing, just to balance it out, just to remind people I was still reliable. The urge scared me. I realized how deeply my value had been tied to depletion, how rest felt like theft. I thought about the woman who talked about ease. I wondered if she ever felt this hollow, or if she had practiced long enough that the space felt natural. I tried to imagine introducing myself without listing what I could carry. The thought made my throat tighten. On the weekend, I stayed home. I didn't make plans, I didn't announce it. I let the day stretch. In the afternoon, guilt crept in uninvited. I told myself I was wasting time. I told myself I should be doing something productive. I sat with that discomfort until it dulled slightly. Not gone, just quieter. That night, I dreamt I was back at the event. People kept handing me things, bags, papers, boxes. I kept taking them until I couldn't see over the pile. When I tried to put one down, someone said my name sharply. I woke up with my heart racing. The next week, an email went out recognizing contributions to a project. My name wasn't there. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. I told myself this was the trade-off. I told myself recognition wasn't the goal. Still, something ached. I realized how much affirmation I had been surviving on, how silence now felt like erasure. At the same time, my body started doing strange things. My shoulders dropped without me thinking about it. I stopped clenching my jaw. I breathed deeper when I wasn't watching myself. It confused me. Relief and fear moved together now. I couldn't separate them. One evening I sat on my couch again, phone face down, lights low. I felt the familiar urge to justify my rest, to explain it to someone, anyone. No one was asking. That was the hardest part. I understood then that I wasn't transitioning into a softer life. I was standing between stories, the one where endurance made me visible, the one where ease required a self I hadn't built yet. I didn't feel healed. I didn't feel brave. I felt unfinished. As the night settled, I rested my hands in my lap and tried not to reach for anything. I listened to the quiet without filling it. A thought surfaced, simple and unsettling. If no one needed me right now, I didn't know what I was allowed to be.